I should do this because this literally works on everything, starting from the tech from 70s. I feel that line of thinking is very limiting and is going to reduce productivity rather than increase, right?
This is DevOps Paradox, episode number 278. GUI versus command line in development. Welcome to DevOps Paradox. This is a podcast about random stuff in which we, Darin and Viktor, pretend we know what we're talking about. Most of the time, we mask our ignorance by putting the word DevOps everywhere we can and mix it with random buzzwords like Kubernetes, serverless, CI/CD, team productivity, islands of happiness, and other fancy expressions that make us sound like we know what we're doing. Occasionally, we invite guests who do know something, but we do not do that often since they might make us look incompetent. The truth is out there, and there is no way we are going to find it. P.S. It's Darin reading this text and feeling embarrassed that Viktor made me do it. Here are your hosts, Darin Pope and Viktor Farsic.
Viktor, you live in GUIs all the time, right? You never go to the command line.
I'm not sure whether command line is a graphical user interface. It is in a way, right? Just low graphic. I mean, K9S is terminal-based GUI, right?
It is. And K9S might show up again in this episode. On today's show, we're going to be taking a look at a blog post from Ian. Ian, I'm not even going to try your last name. The link to this blog post is down in the description. It's on Container Solutions, and the name of the post is In Praise of Low-Tech DevEx. Now that I said it out loud, that got really long really fast. In Praise of Low-Tech DevEx. What does this mean? Beginning of the post, he said he went to a new company, still young, sent out an email saying, what IDEs are you guys using? The company was using TCL. Do you remember TCL?
I have no idea what you're talking about. What is TCL?
It's a language. Moving on.
Okay.
That's okay. It's a language that nobody should use. But they were using TCL. And he was like, okay, sends out an email. What kind of IDEs is everybody using? A few moments later, he gets a one-word response back from the CTO that says, Vim. That was it. Vim. Then Ian tells a story. Okay, I went to Eclipse. I went to Kate. But then finally ended up at Vim. I had this problem today. I was actually recording a video. So if you're watching the video today, I'm actually dressed up. Viktor can see I actually have a collar. I never wear collars here. But I was recording a video for something else. And I was working on Ubuntu. And the default editor for Ubuntu is Nano. I don't like Nano. I should be able to use Nano. But I said, okay, in the video, I said, okay, I'm going to update my editor to Vim just so I can actually get this thing done. Where do you fall on the line of, should we be using CLIs a lot? Where's that right line? As a developer, I mean, it's hard-pressed to say that Visual Studio Code is not a bad tool.
So I use exclusively Visual Studio Code, including the terminal in Visual Studio Code. I kind of feel that a combination of both is great and all-in-one type of solution, right? If I would have to guess, I would say that I spend probably 70% of my time in terminal and the rest in editor. But both of them are in VS Code, in my case. I would argue that there are certain things that are better done more visually and certain things that are better done through the command line. Right? Like merging something in Git. Do you prefer command line?
Never.
Exactly. But I do use command line for everything else in Git, or almost everything else. Like, commit, push, what's not.
I will say I do use git diff.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't want to try to deal with a merge. Like git diff is fine.
Git diff is fine. But when I need to merge and, accept upcoming, incoming, outgoing, whatever, it's simply better when it's in something more visual, if you want to use the term, right? More graphical. Split panes left and right and things like that.
It sounds like you're using Visual Studio Code as your operating system.
More or less. I mean, the only two, now I'm looking at my computer, there are three things open: Chrome, Visual Studio Code, and Slack. That's all I use, right? Now, the terminal, the shell I use is heavily customized, right? I have some ZSH plugins, I have a lot of CLIs. There's a lot going on there, but applications, those three. I will say right at the beginning that I did try a couple of times to switch to NeoVim, and I understand how productive it is, but I'm not sufficiently masochistic to go through the pain to get to the level that makes me very, very proficient with it.
I haven't even tried to go down the path, or at least not in recent memory, to go down the NeoVim path.
You can do some... No, actually, let me backtrack a second. I always had great admiration for Vim ninjas, right? For people who are really proficient. I'm not that proficient in Vim. Let me say from the start. I know how to use Vim. I know maybe 10 shortcuts, and that's enough for what I need when I need to edit something very, very quickly, right? And I always admired when people are really proficient, because the speed with which they work and how just looking at them work is like magic. But I'm not one of those. I'm not good enough. And the same thing applies with NeoVim, I guess.
I would say you're good enough, but it's just not the muscle memory that you have.
So let's start with a question, right? And now I'm talking about editing something, right? Not about executing commands. That to me is a terminal. There is no question asked. If somebody goes to some Visual Studio Code plugin to execute something instead of CLI, that person is dead to me. But for editing files, what would be the advantage of not using VS Code? Shortcuts are there, right? Speed is there as well. I can imagine maybe being able to use it anywhere without installing anything. Maybe that's the thing. What does the post say?
Let's get into that. He gets down into the next section. How is low-tech DevEx better? And I'm going to read a little bit here. All LTD, low-tech DevEx tools arguably reflect the aims and principles of the Unix philosophy, which has been summarized as, this is the key part, write programs that do one thing and do it well. Write programs to work together. Write programs to handle text streams, because that is a universal interface. So if I was to, how many times in your life have you done grep sed awk? Piped.
Zillion times. Infinite amount.
How many times can you remember how to write the print statement inside of awk without looking it up? With the curly braces and the quotes.
Depends. Can I swear in this podcast? Okay, because I was about to tell you the solution for it, and the name just happens to be a swear word.
Oh, that one. Yes, I know what you're talking about. So yes, go look up that swear word and you will find how to get around that. But having those separate programs, piping them together, makes life to us easier. Would it be easier to everyone? Probably not. Maybe someone fresh just starting up that hasn't been subsumed by an AI yet may not have spent their whole life living on the command line. So maybe that's not where they start.
And also piping things is very useful when you want to automate something. Not necessarily very useful when you want to do something for the first time and never again. Let's say, as an example, I want to find a word in some text. Doesn't matter whether it's JSON or Markdown or YAML or Go or whatever it is. Is piping better than me pressing Command F in VS Code and searching for it? It's not. Or at least not to me. Now, if that's a repeatable action, then it is. Because then we're talking about automation. We're talking about me creating scripts that will do something over and over and over again. But as you said before, I don't remember awk arguments, and I will never remember them. Period. And I can easily find them, but not for one shot something.
That's why Stack Overflow and Expert Exchange exist. Actually, that's why Google exists, to go search those two places. And now I guess you're using AI to figure these things out, right?
Yeah. But again, would you go to the length of going to Stack Overflow or AI or whatever, only instead of just searching in a document, whatever the editor you're using?
Oh, that's true. No. Everything's there. Everything that I would need would already be there, right?
So what I'm really trying to say, I feel that, again, we should probably continue through the article, but I don't think that people should be so extremist, kind of, everything must be command line, or nothing should be command line, or the other way around. There is a time and space for different ways of working depending on what you're doing. Observability is a good example, right? Hey, whomever thinks that they're going to go through logs through command line is not going to end up well.
Not for very long, anyway.
Yeah, I'm talking about serious. Not, hey, I demo something on my laptop, but hey, you're going to sift through thousands or tens of thousands of log entries to find what you're looking for. Yeah, be my guest if you're going to do that through command line.
So moving back to the article, portability. LTD is generally very portable. I'm actually going to read this whole section. If you can use Vim, I'll go ahead and parenthetically say, or VI, it will work in a variety of situations, both friendly and hostile. Vim, for example, can be easily run on Windows, Mac, Linux, even that, here's the key part, old HPUX server that doesn't even run Bash, but yet it does run your mission-critical database. So tools that have been around forever, in some way, shape, or form, can, most of the time, at least the basics, thinking Vim, :WQ will write and quit, no matter where you go.
True, that is a definitely upside of those, right? There are certain Linux things that you need to know and learn because they're absolutely everywhere, including VI, right? But I would limit it to VI, right? Anything, LSCD, whatever the commands are. And you should better learn the base commands that are everywhere. Like, hey, you should know ls rather than ESA, which nobody knows, but it's so much better than ls. Now, the argument of, what did you say? It works even on, was it Solaris or something like that?
HPUX.
HPUX. That's not a valid argument. That's not a valid argument at all, because that would be the same thing. Hey, let's all program in COBOL because it works both in Kubernetes and in mainframe, right? Yeah, yes, it does. So what?
Just because you can doesn't mean you should? Is that where you're headed, sort of?
Yeah, I mean, we shouldn't be going all for the lowest denominator. Hey, I should do this because this literally works on everything, starting from the tech from 70s. I feel that line of thinking is very limiting and is going to reduce productivity rather than increase, right? So, yeah, whether it works on whichever you said, the HP something, I couldn't care less, really. When the time comes that I have to deal with it, I will either quit or figure it out.
Next up was speed. These tools tend to run fast when doing their work and take little time to start up. I'll agree with that. How often do you type awk and things just happen and it takes 30 seconds? Never, right?
First of all, depends. Try to go through tens of thousands of log entries and you will see that that's actually not that fast. First of all, right? It's not always fast. But more importantly, I think that speed is not really, if you're not talking about running something in production, right, which is a special subject, but, development, what's not. Speed is not an issue. Come on. You take the cheapest possible MacBook, the oldest and cheapest silicon MacBook, and everything is lightning fast. Doesn't matter really anymore.
I guess that is true, because the hardware is caught up to our thinking speed, maybe?
Yeah. It took a while, but I don't remember the last time I said to myself, hey, this could be faster. I don't remember when was the last time that happened. And I'm talking about development now, not again, not running something in production with millions of users.
Yeah, as a developer, again, that's what this article is focused on, is the developer experience. It's been probably, where do you think the timeline started happening? It was before the Apple Silicon stuff came out, but not much before that. Like 2018, right? 19. There was sort of a big change around that time.
Yeah, everything became fast. But to me, still the pivotal point was Silicon, simply because even though maybe we didn't need that increase in speed, that was leaps big advancement compared to what we had before, right? Any silicon is better than any Intel. Kind of the worst silicon you can get is better than Intel chip, and by a huge margin, right? Maybe we don't need that speed, but at least since then, everything is fine. It's so good that I'm not even... There is nothing that can convince me to replace my M1 chips with any other chip. 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever is the latest. No need anymore.
Next up is power. We sort of linked to this before, is that the CLIs give you power. You think about Emacs. I've forgotten it all, thankfully. That was a bad dream for me. But there's a lot of power in these. Again, Emacs isn't quote-unquote command line, but boy, was there a lot of power in it. It could be your mail client. It could be your newsreader. It could actually be an editor as well.
Yeah. I mean, it's not as well. That's the primary function. Or
no, you're right. I was just saying the other things were incidental. Yeah. Now, the next section, I think, is the biggest one, and we've already talked about it before. Composability. And he slashed it with embeddability. I'm not sure so much about the embedding, but let's go there. Because these tools, this is the key part here. Because these tools have fewer dependencies. Okay, stop. If you were to go in and look at the package for VS Code, what type of application is it, Victor?
It's TypeScript.
It's an Electron application, correct.
Yeah.
And how many dependencies are buried in that application?
Nobody knows. I can only imagine the number is infinite.
Let's just say it's infinite. Let's just say that's true. Now, how many libraries do we need to be able to run LS?
No, just one binary.
That one
right?
specifically is just one binary. Now, we could get into curl. Curl has potentially lots of dependencies based on which flag you're throwing. And that's the nice thing.
And if you go for Vim, for example, or NeoVim, it's just as bad as VS Code. When you start converting it into IDE, you go crazy with plugins. Now, how many plugins each of those dependencies, how many dependencies each of those plugins has, that I don't know, probably not much or any. But here's a question for you. And this is going back to the previous conversation. Okay, so VS Code plugins have infinite amount of dependencies, and do you care?
I typically would not care as long as it works.
Yeah. Doesn't it?
I would say pretty much without fail, it does. Today.
Yeah. Today. Yeah, exactly. So when I'm saying, I'm not talking about the early stages, I'm talking Visual Studio, VS Code today, on any silicon chip. It just works. And I couldn't care less how many dependencies it has, right? Not my problem. Unless I'm the person developing plugins.
I will say, as VS Code, I'm still running it on Intel. I mean, I've got it on Silicon as well. And even on an Intel, it's fine. Right? It just works.
Exactly.
But still, think about it. Being able to compose, albeit a very ugly CLI, to where I can grep for something, I can cat something, pipe it to grep. Actually, I wouldn't even do that. I would grep a file, pipe it to awk, then pipe it to sort, then pipe it to unique, and I get 2 lines. That's amazing.
It is, but again, for something you're automating, or for editing something.
Okay, that's for automation. You're correct.
Yeah. Oh, I have zero doubt, right? Kind of everything ends up being a script. If it's executed more than once, it's a script, right? Or a command in a markdown that you copy and paste. That's fine. But I guess that this article is more focused on editing, right, than executing commands.
Well, it's not so much editing as it is just, I mean, he keeps going back to Vim, but it's just talking about as a developer,
Yeah, exactly.
what are the tools? How can I do things on my machine to make life better? If we go ahead and move on through the article, user needs are emphasized, more sustainable. This goes back to earlier when we were talking about the Unix philosophy. The program does one thing, and that's it. So is that easier to maintain? You could argue that curl isn't necessarily easy to maintain, but it does one of 3,000 things now.
And curl is yet another one. I know two arguments. Anything beyond that, Stack Overflow, man.
So if we were able to make our lives easier, we're using VS Code all the time. We would tell everybody to use VS Code with this certain set of extensions, right?
In my case, I guess it depends. In my case, very few extensions. The only extensions I care about are extensions that beautify my code. So I don't use extensions for, I don't know, GitHub, this or that. Personally, I don't use any of those. The only thing I care about is that when I start writing something, let's say KCL, something exotic, right? That I have, what's the wording? Colorized? No, that is syntax highlighting. That's the only thing I really care. Because I'm using the editor and I want yellows and blues, and this, autocomplete and all that stuff. And then when it comes to execute something, to build it, let's say, then yeah, terminal. So I think that I'm defending and going against this article at the same time.
It's a tension that we live in as developers, right? It's like, I want to do it my way, but my way isn't necessarily the best, but it's the best for me if it's a Tuesday during the third month of a solar eclipse. You know, how does it work out? Now, this article continues on. And Ian, if you're listening to this or watching it, I can't believe you went there. You use makefiles and use make. It is 2024. You no longer have to be bound to make. There are options.
I guess that make is a good example, right? If you go down the track, hey, this works literally everywhere, then make is the only really reasonable option, right? So you're sacrificing yourself, becoming miserable for the sake of it, that working everywhere, right? Or the other way around. Hey, there are zillion alternatives, including Docker, which I believe is somewhere mentioned in the article, right? That don't work everywhere, but hey, simple installation helps a lot.
I'm bashing on make just because it's easy. Make files are fine until they're not. And sometimes you don't understand when it's not.
The moment you see phony for the first time, you stop understanding what the heck is going on.
So understanding how we can use all these tools. Is it always right to use GUIs? Is it always right to use CLI? Victor, you've already said it. The answer is no. Or is the answer yes?
The answer is, why would anybody care? Right? So the question we had at the beginning, hey, what are you guys using? If that question was informative, hey, maybe I will find and learn something new, then that was okay question. If the question was aimed towards, so that I use the same thing, unless you're a newbie, I don't understand that question. Work any way you like. I hate companies who actually... I'm not sure whether that's happening today, right? But I'm pretty sure that you had the same experience in the past, Darin, when you would join some company, they say, okay, over here, everybody has to use Eclipse. Those are the horrible situations. Why the heck do you care how I write something?
It shouldn't matter. But for some people it does.
But I'm supposed to deliver code, right? And I'm pushing it to Git. And how I get there, it's my problem. It's not yours.
Unless you have a pointy-haired boss from Dilbert running your shop.
Yeah, then you keep it in the background, and when you see the person coming, you just put it in the foreground so that he or she is happy, and then you go back to whatever you were doing.
I will say, in defense of Eclipse, there was one place I was at to where VI was the only thing that was allowed because we had to SSH into an account on a box to do our work.
That's very different. SSH, so if SSH was at the beginning of each of those sentences in that post, I would agree 100%, right? When I'm SSHing, I'm definitely not installing, and I would not allow anybody to install random stuff in a server so that they feel more comfortable. If that server has Nano, you're using Nano. If it has VI, you're using VI, right? It's as easy as that. This SSH is a very different story. Everything I said so far applies to my machine.
Right. But in the case to where you're, as a developer, you're SSHing in to your account to do work on just think of it like in the time before GitHub Codespaces. Is it Codespaces? Yeah, Codespaces. You would SSH into a server where your account was, and you would do all of your work there. In our case, when we would SSH in, we would use Vim. But then, when somebody decided to bring in Emacs and set up an SSH tunnel from their desktop down to their SSH account, down to their account on the box, they got their hands slapped. It's like, no, you're not allowed to use that. That was silly.
If you SSH to edit something, I would assume that you are changing some configuration file or something like that, right? Because, hey, you're tweaking some parameters because the server is too slow or whatever, right? Anything beyond that, we are not SSHing anymore, right? You write your code, you compile it to jar, bar, tar, whatever you're compiling it to, and you're putting in that server. You're not editing code after SSHing, I hope, anymore. If that's what you're doing, please let me know where you work so that I never visit that place.
I think what you're thinking, I think you're mixing two things. You're thinking about the production boxes where code may be. I'm talking about, instead of me having a true machine, well, that's a bad way to think about it. I've got an account on a box, and it's basically our shared development box. Not that we're doing shared development, but it's like all the developers have accounts on there, and that's where you're supposed to be doing because we have all the home directories being automatically backed up and being checked and scanned. And so we want all development being done on that box. But just think of it as an extension off of your actual physical machine. That's what I'm talking about.
Development as in testing?
No.
Development as in writing code?
As in writing code.
Well, going back to the silicon argument.
It's green screens to me back then. Right?
Yeah, but we're talking about 80s, 90s. Or we're talking about 2024.
I'm talking about 2005. It's been 20 years. So okay. I should let it go by now. I should let it go.
Let it go, Darin. You're not going there again.
No. So going back to the article, we'll go ahead and go down to the bottom. Again, the link to this article is down in the episode description. Ian gets into a couple of special mentions. Now, he goes through some of the typical tools that you should know. Make, Docker you brought up, Git, SSH, right? All these are just tools that you want to know and understand. Even if you have to go back to Stack Overflow to figure out some things. But then he has a couple of specials at the bottom. He talks about top, use top, or the variations which are nicer, CTOP or HTOP, right? Top is a good one. SAR for monitoring, performance testing, done all that. One I've never heard of before, ENTR, run commands when specific files change, get rapid feedback in dev. Never heard of it, ENTR.
Yeah, I used it only briefly, but yeah, it's, watching for changes.
There's one called NNN, which is a file browser. Haven't heard of that. But then finally, coming back to what we talk about more often than not, K9S.
Yeah, baby.
So think about this. Victor, given a choice today, If I told you you're only allowed to use one tool to interact with a Kubernetes cluster, what tool is that going to be?
kubectl.
Of course you would say that.
If I have to have only one, then that's very clear. But if you're talking about, hey, some kind of dashboard for Kubernetes, yeah, K9S, no doubt.
Because you wouldn't want to do with kubectl what you can do in K9S for that type of work, correct?
I feel that that's similar to what I said before. Hey, if I need to execute something, send a YAML to API. I'm using kubectl, no K9S or anything like that. For observability purposes, for me seeing what's going on, yeah, K9S. That's when graphics. So editing, observing graphical interface is better. And I'm putting K9S as a graphical interface just to be 100% sure that we're talking about the same thing, right? And then piping, that's execution.
So again, the link to this post is down in the description. What do you think about it? Head over to the Slack workspace, go to the podcast channel, look for episode number 278, and leave your comments there.
We hope this episode was helpful to you. If you want to discuss it or ask a question, please reach out to us. Our contact information and a link to the Slack workspace are at devopsparadox.com/contact. If you subscribe through Apple Podcast, be sure to leave us a review there. That helps other people discover this podcast. Go sign up right now at devopsparadox.com to receive an email whenever we drop the latest episode. Thank you for listening to DevOps Paradox.